that somehow we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, he said, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So Dr. King got it in this message. And he was standing for something, for somebody other than himself. So supporting and being active in the work of equality is a call to action for all of us. It's a call to consciousness. It took a vast and diverse group of people to help Dr. King defend the cause of justice. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He knew the secret that he could never be what he ought to be unless you were what you ought to be, and you could never be what you ought to be unless he was what he ought to be. We should remember that. So if you don't know your purpose yet, know this: you have a responsibility to support the cause of justice. So my dad is a preacher, and I'm a Christian. My holy book is the Bible. I don't know what your holy book is, but that's my holy book. And my holy book tells me that I have a responsibility to justice. And a verse in Psalms 82, verse 3, commands us to defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy. A translation of that in the Message Bible, which is another Bible that just speaks more plainly, says this, sums it up this way: you've corrupted justice long enough. You've let the wicked get away with murder. You're here to defend the defenseless, to make sure that the underdogs get a fair break. Your job is to stand up for the powerless and prosecute all those who exploit them. There is no denying that we have responsibility to justice. Yep. So those of us, individuals who are in a position of influence, we have a responsibility to use our influence to better the lives of others who have little or no influence. And sadly, I have experienced in my life those with power who have refused to lend their power and influence to improve the circumstances of others. Imagine that I could help your circumstances just by doing a little bit, by getting the door open for you, by supporting you in any way. But I didn't, because I believed that if I supported you, it would somehow jeopardize my influence. Unfortunately, this selfish behavior is practiced all too often, and even in the African American community. So I'm disturbed by the inequities in healthcare, and my background is healthcare. And I'm particularly disturbed about the inequities in the industry here in St. Louis. And I'm disappointed by those who are in a position of influence, who could use their power to influence and to further the cause of justice and equity within this industry. But they won't. To me, this is as bad as prejudice. I heard Cornel West recently on a Tavis Smiley special speaking about Dr. King in relation to the speech that he gave on the Vietnam War. And he said that Dr. King had reached a point where he had to break the silence, and if he remained silent, it would be a lie. I understand that because I've come to that point in my life that I have to speak out. When I went to Chicago, I didn't know what to expect, but this is what I found. So I work in the south side of Chicago. I don't know if any of you know anything about the south side of Chicago, but it has a long history of in the civil rights movements of protest and riots and so forth. And so what I learned is that the citizens of the south side of Chicago have demanded the institutions that serve them to do it diligently. And that obviously it's not perfect. They got some of the same issues that we have here in St. Louis. The difference is the people stand up for justice for each other. That's the difference. They stand up against the injustices, and the people there will protest. They will stand on the lawns of the Capitol. They'll bring the preachers and business people and legislators and lobbyists to the protest, but they will not tolerate injustice, and they will require that the industry there listens and help to create a system that is inclusive for all. So I share this comparison because I'm a St. Louisan, and I'll always be a St. Louisan even though I live in Chicago, and I love St. Louis. So I thought I'd share that comparison with you because it feels like to me that the people in St. Louis are still oppressed. And that there is, that injustices are tolerated. And that there's a sense of apathy sometimes in the attitude about injustice, and there's a sense of defenselessness against it. And that not enough citizens stand up against it. But I pray that the citizens of St. Louis will stand up against injustices because it's all of our responsibility. And then if more people did it, then they would require that the leaders of industry and policy would respond to the injustices that prevail here in St. Louis.
Yep.
So allow me just one more soapbox before I sit down because I might not get invited back. So that's okay. If I don't, I live in Chicago now, where I can do this. Okay. So I don't know if you saw the movie Django. I did. If you weren't disturbed by the movie Django, then you need to check yourself. There were two things in that movie that disturbed me the most. One was the senseless mockery of the tragedy of slavery. The second was I don't know his name, the Samuel L. Jackson character disturbed me terribly. His role, to me, has great similarity to the behavior of those of us who refuse to use our power to benefit others. In this movie, Jackson's position of power with the slave owner was based on his betrayal of the other blacks and other slaves. Betraying other slaves actually gave him power over them and privilege with the slave owner. When we don't use our position of influence to further the cause for others, we are committing a tragedy against mankind. And Martin Luther King said this as guiding words to that. He said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in the times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he will lift some bruised and beaten brother to a higher and more noble life. It's a risky business to be an activist. Standing for justice is an important decision. It's a personal choice, and you can't be passive standing for justice. You may not be in a position of power in your life circumstances, but you are in a position of influence. Whether you can form a neighborhood group to fight against crime, or you can stand up for somebody who's been wrongly treated, or you can be an activist in a cause that is of great interest to you, or just be a downright activist. You have a responsibility to stand up for justice. And I would like to call you all to an action today as we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King. We must always remember what Dr. King stood for. He didn't create a movement that he imagined would be lived out in the lives of people, or that would not be lived out in the lives of people all over the United States of America. He fought for justice to protect all of us. And so I admonish you all today to remember that you have to stand for justice for one and for all. Thank you.